8 seconds of silence. A heartbeat. Then a woman's scream, muffled, cut off. Narrator, low, deliberate. In the sweltering summer of 1840, deep in the red clay soil of Georgia, there stood a plantation house no map dares to mark. Its name was spoken only in whispers, and only by those drunk enough to forget themselves. A house that was never burned, never demolished, simply left to rot, its windows dark, its history scrubbed from the ledgers. But what happened inside was not erased. It was buried, layer by layer, like a corpse no one wanted to claim. Images, slow pans across cracked portraits, warped wood, moth-eaten curtains. Narrator. Tonight, we exhume what the archives refused to keep. A ritual of flesh and betrayal, overseen by a woman whose name was once praised in churches. A woman who turned ownership into hunger, and whose sins left stains no century could bleach. She was born Elizabeth Harrow. To the outside world, she was refined, educated, and pious. Her family owned nearly 100 souls. Yet behind her careful smile, there flickered something feral. Visitors wrote of her penetrating gaze, like she was reading not your words, but your marrow. Camera, a close-up of an oil painting. The eyes seemed too alive. Narrator. By the age of 30, Elizabeth was the undisputed ruler of the Harrow Plantation. Her husband dead of fever, her father buried, her brothers scattered. She wore widow's black, but she wore it like armor. And with that armor came power, unchecked, unsupervised. Power she would wield in ways so grotesque, so ritualistic, that even her slaves would pray not for freedom, but for invisibility. Narrator. Every transaction followed the same order. When a male slave was to be sold, whether bought from another plantation, inherited, or born on her land, Elizabeth demanded a final night. A night alone. No overseer, no witness, no sound allowed beyond the walls. The next morning, the man was gone, loaded onto wagons, never to return. Shot, a candle extinguishing, a locked door closing. Some whispered she did it out of spite, to humiliate, to remind them of her absolute dominion. Others whispered darker, that she was sealing them, binding them, branding their souls before sending them away. And those who remained, those who survived her, spoke only in half sentences, as if the air itself punished the full truth. Narrator. The nearby town of Mason's Ferry knew. Of course they knew. Wagons full of men passed through every few months, their eyes hollow, their bodies gaunt. But no one spoke. Not the preachers, who shook Elizabeth's hand every Sunday. Not the merchants, who took her coin without question. Not even the wives, who pretended not to see the scratches on her wrists, the faint bruises at her throat. Camera. A decaying church, pews collapsed. The silence was not born of ignorance. It was survival. To speak was to be marked. And so the town swallowed its shame, him after him, until the very walls of the church seemed to sigh under the weight of their complicity. Narrator. Plantation ledgers are meticulous. Names, dates, prices, ages, conditions. But in the Harrow records, entire sections are blackened, scratched out, pages ripped away. In their place, one finds strange markings, loops, symbols, initials written and then erased until the parchment nearly tears. Camera. Old ledger pages, ink bleeding like veins. One page remains intact. Next to the sale of a boy of 17, the word, consumed. No explanation. No value. Just that single, chilling word. And beside it, Elizabeth's own hand, unmistakable, an ornate E, curling like a serpent. Narrator. Census records from 1839 list 127 enslaved individuals on Harrow land. By 1842, the number had fallen to less than 90. No war, no epidemic, no rebellion. Just vanishing. Each disappearance neatly aligned with a transaction in Elizabeth's hand. Yet the men never arrived at their supposed destinations. Purchasers swore the wagons carried only crates of tools, barrels of molasses, bales of cotton. Their testimony echoes like madness. How could bodies vanish from the earth without a single grave, without a single witness? Camera. Wagon wheels and mud. A shadow shifting unnaturally inside. Narrator. In 1866, long after the war, a weather-stained journal surfaced. Belonging to Robert Dilling, Harrow's overseer, Its pages tell more than ledgers ever dared. He writes of nights where men were dragged, trembling, into the ladies' chambers. He writes of screams muffled under hymns played on the parlor piano. He writes of smells, metallic, like blood that should not have been spilled. And he writes of dreams that followed. Dreams where he swore he saw those same men wandering the grounds, eyes white, mouths sewn shut by silence. Camera, journal pages flicking by, words dissolving into ash. Narrator. The Baptist Church in Mason's Ferry should have condemned her. Instead, it enshrined her. Elizabeth donated generously, restoring the bell tower, gilding the pulpit, and financing the hymnals. Preachers sang her virtue, describing her as God's widow. No sermon spoke of the vanished men. No prayer admitted the blood that stained her wealth. When the choir rose in harmony, it was not worship, it was camouflage. And behind their trembling voices, one could almost hear the low sobbing of the damned, pressed into the cracks of the sanctuary walls. Camera, a choir singing, then slowing, voices pitched down to a dirge. Narrator. In 1841, Elizabeth funded a children's home in Savannah. They called it an act of charity. But the children who grew up there spoke, decades later, of strange gifts. Lockets containing tufts of hair, pressed flowers with blood still staining their veins, a rosary too heavy for any child to carry. One orphan recalled a visit from the lady herself. She kissed each boy's forehead but lingered, too long, on the oldest. That boy never reached adulthood. His name evaporated from the rolls, as though he'd never been. Camera, broken toys, a child's shoe left in dust. Narrator. By 1845, Mason's Ferry was rotting from within. Families fled, unable to endure the dread that hung like mildew. Others stayed, clinging to their silence, until madness bloomed in their homes. One woman drowned her 3 children in the river, insisting she heard their voices echoing from the plantation fields. A blacksmith set fire to his own shop after hammering nails in the shape of strange symbols. When questioned, he only repeated, "She made me." By then, Elizabeth Harrow was more than a woman. She was an infection, a curse that spread through land, through blood, through prayer. Camera, the ruins of a town, smoke still curling. Narrator. When the Civil War ignited, fire swept across Georgia. Plantations burned, crops blackened, families scattered. Yet Harrow House remained untouched. Soldiers marched past its gates, refusing to enter. Union reports mention it only once, a structure best left undisturbed. No cannon fire scarred its walls. No torch ever dared its timbers. To both North and South, the house was marked, not with ink, but with dread. The war devoured the state, but Elizabeth's dominion endured, as though violence itself bent away from her. Camera, battlefield ruins, smoke shifting toward an untouched house on the horizon. Narrator. By 1870, Elizabeth Harrow should have been an old woman. Yet visitors describe her face as unchanged. Skin like pale marble, eyes sharp as the day she first wore widow's black. Some swore she had discovered a secret medicine. Others muttered she had drunk her youth from the men she sold, drained their years as easily as a chalice drains wine. When she passed through town, children hid behind skirts, and grown men crossed themselves. She did not age. She endured. Camera, photographs dissolving, her face unchanging while the townspeople wrinkle and fade. Narrator. Freedmen who returned to the region after emancipation refused to step foot on Harrow soil. One testified that in dreams, he still heard Elizabeth's parlor piano, the same hymn repeated, forever unfinished. Another swore that on the night of his escape, he saw figures standing in the fields, motionless, eyes reflecting moonlight like glass. They did not chase him. They only watched. His voice cracked when he asked, what if they weren't alive anymore, but weren't allowed to rest either? Camera, shadows in a field, rows of corn moving though the wind is still. Narrator. In 1901, a team of surveyors cataloging abandoned estates found the Harrow property collapsed in places. But beneath the floorboards of the main hall, they uncovered a cellar no record mentioned. The walls were carved with names, hundreds of names, scratched in fingernail and stone. Some were incomplete, some upside down, some repeated endlessly until the letters blurred into madness. In the corner lay a single chair, its wood darkened by stains that the men refused to test. They sealed the cellar, walked away, and filed nothing. Some truths cannot be spoken aloud. Camera. Flickering lantern revealing walls full of desperate etchings. Narrator. Elizabeth Harrow died, at least, so they claimed, in 1912. No body was displayed. No funeral was held. A simple notice in the Savannah paper read, "The lady has passed." Yet her name continued to ripple through Georgia's soil. Families who once worked her land reported nightmares of her voice, whispering bargains. Children in Mason's Ferry, decades later, were born with faint markings across their wrists, symbols that matched those in the overseer's journal. Whether curse, inheritance, or infection, the lady had seeded herself into the veins of the South. Death was not the end. It was only dispersal. Camera. Family portraits with faint scratches across the children's arms. Narrator. In 1934, a team of folklorists from Atlanta University attempted to document the oral traditions of Georgia. When they reached Mason's Ferry, they were warned, "Do not ask about the Harrow woman." But they pressed forward, and within weeks 2 researchers vanished. Their notes, recovered later, described chants in the fields at night, voices that seemed both male and female, layered in impossible harmony. Their last entry reads, "She does not sleep. She remembers." The surviving scholars abandoned the project, and the Harrow name was never spoken in academic halls again. Camera. Leather-bound notebooks, words fading to black ink smears. Narrator. By the 1940s, the story had twisted into a rhyme whispered among children. They called it the widow's choice. At dusk, children would circle an abandoned house, chant Elizabeth's name, and dare one child to step inside. Those who entered swore they heard footsteps on the floor above, though the house had no second story left standing. Some came out laughing, others trembling, but one boy never came out at all. The town buried the story, claiming he'd run away. But his mother's screams still echo in the local papers. "She took him. She took him." Camera. A broken toy at the threshold of a collapsing house. Narrator. An old man, raised in the Savannah orphanage Elizabeth once funded, returned to Mason's Ferry in 1947. He carried only a rusted locket and a single page torn from a Bible, where the word blood was circled 27 times. He spent one night in the ruins of Harrow House. The next morning, hunters found his body in the fields, his face frozen in terror, his fingernails worn to bone. On the locket was scratched a final word, hers. No coroner's report was filed. His death was not explained. It was buried, like all the others. Camera. Morning mist drifting over fields, a body half hidden in stalks of grass. Narrator. In 1950, an amateur radio operator reported strange frequencies near Mason's Ferry. Static gave way to faint hymns, hymns no one had sung in a century. Within the hymns, voices whispered. Men's voices. Hundreds of them. Each fragment repeated the same plea, "Release us." The operator captured 20 minutes of this transmission before his equipment caught fire. The tape survived. Listening to it is said to provoke visions. A white-draped woman standing in a doorway, beckoning, promising release that never comes. Camera. Spinning reels of an old tape recorder, smoke curling from its wires. Narrator. Today, Mason's Ferry is gone. The land has been reclaimed by forest, the roads swallowed by vines. But the Harrow House, rotting, broken, hollow, still stands. Locals avoid it, but hikers sometimes stumble across its frame. They report the same thing: a sudden drop in temperature, the faint sound of piano keys, and the overwhelming sensation of being watched. Some leave offerings, coins, rosaries, even blood from a cut finger, hoping to appease what lingers there. But the truth remains: Elizabeth Harrow never died. She persists, in ledger and dream, in whispered hymn and corrupted bloodline. This is not just history. This is inheritance. And if you are hearing this, then perhaps, in some way, she has already found you. Final shot. The camera moves slowly toward the house. The door creaks open on its own. Darkness inside. The screen cuts to black.